All right, welcome back, everybody. Another story, and actually, I'm really curious about this one because I had the privilege of being able to do background. I don't want to say stalking. I want to say research. Because you have it, actually, you got a full website. And so I was able to research everything that was going on. You have a lot of information on your blog, a lot of different pieces and parts of your story. So I was able to do that. And I was not stalking. I was totally researching for where we were at today. So I'm pretty excited about this, knowing full well that you are part of Pennsylvania and there's a lot of that in your blood, living there, being a part of that. And I know that I grew up right around Meadville, so I'm very familiar with that area as well. So, again, I'm just excited about that. And then, even the sports aspect that we're going to probably touch into and some of the things that are going on. I mean, many of our listeners are sports fanatics and they're, whether it's NCAA or even into the pro levels. And so I probably should stop talking and just get into it. But thank you. Thank you for speaking with us and taking the time out of your day. I know I feel like it's a privilege and an honor because time is value, and I appreciate you doing that with us.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. And thanks so much for the invitation to be part of this podcast. I love the heartbeat, behind what it is you're doing and the stories that you're sharing. And I think each and every one of us has a story worth
Mm-hmm.
sharing. And it is the possibility that somebody else could be impacted that
Mm-hmm.
makes it worth sharing. So I appreciate what you're doing
Yeah.
in this space.
Yeah. That's so well put. And I really appreciate that. Let's get started with our first question, which it's coming, but I love asking this question is who are you? Who is Ashley? We've got 30, 60, 90 seconds in an elevator kind of atmosphere. And I love hearing about who you are. And again, not necessarily what you do, but who are you?
Great question, loaded question. I won't bore you with the where I'm from, what I do, to your point, but what I will say is that I am endlessly curious about the world, people, myself. I'm fascinated by what moves us, what drives us, what
Mm-hmm.
motivates us, what inspires us, all of the things beyond the surface, right? And also how it is that we go through the unexpected parts in our journey. And
Right.
I imagine we'll get into, some of this throughout our conversation, but um, it's those things that that we go through, that we learn along the way, that really help ourselves to learn more about ourselves. And that's a big part, in my own life and in my own journey. So
Wow. All right. I'm going to switch gears. And I didn't tell you I was going to do this. So we're going to switch gears. And I'm going to do something different than we don't do normally in all these other podcasts and some of these interviews. So I'm surprising you with this and I'm letting you know. But here's
love
what
it.
I'd like to do. I'd like to give you I'd like you to give us kind of a little tease about what you were doing and then the fact that you completely just, in essence, abandoned a lot of the core of what you thought was going to be. So just if you can kind of give us that tease of I was here, I was successful, and I'm not sharing that because I know what it is, but I want you to share just kind of where you were with your success and what was going on, and then a sudden, like, I'll call it the deviation. Like it's just a turn. I'm not going that way. I'm going a different way. So can you give us
Totally.
kind of just a general tease of that, and then we'll dig into what you thought and some of those other things.
For sure. So I'll lay the foundation here in the context. I grew up a multi-sport athlete. Basketball was my sport. It was the game that drew me in, the one that I wanted to pursue, the highest goals with. And
Mm.
so all throughout all as I was growing up and through high school, I played competitively. I was traveling a lot with this goal of playing at the highest level, which would be Division 1 basketball. I played, on a very elite circuit and team, a lot of my teammates getting these offers, etc. It didn't go as planned for me. I ended up going to a different school. I still played at a smaller level, Division 3 level. I still played and ended up after my sophomore year stopped stopped playing. Now, all the things in between, is the good stuff,
Yep.
in the sense of the learnings, the self-discovery, and then the whole identity shift, right? So then when I left, I ended up transferring universities after my sophomore year. And then from there, it was really a bit of the first turning point in my life, right? Going from who I am as an athlete into just learning about myself and who it is that I am. And then there's another turning point after that too, of deeper discovery in those ways. And so that's kind of the context, right, of my background in that way. Growing up in sports, I know you mentioned, your audience, some sports fans here. I have a long history in sport, from both as an athlete and then into my
Yep.
career working in different, health and wellness and sports organizations, et cetera. So it's been just ingrained in me. And there's a lot more there too, but I'll
Yeah.
pause there.
It's so your story. I've never shared this. I'm actually going to share this. We might actually be a little bit longer than our normal time frame, but I'm going to share this because that path that you just said, I also quit ball on my sophomore year. I was actually a freshman, and then we were doing stuff. And basically, the very, very first game that I ever played on college level, in warm-ups, I twisted my ankle coming down on somebody else's foot. And I was out for the rest of the couple. I couldn't walk on it. It was so bad. And I never played college sports. I never played a real game. I always sat I never got into it. And then sophomore, and so I'm just feeling that heartbeat of like, I had the same thoughts. I was going to play ball. I was going to go down that road. And anyway, let's get into your story, not my story.
I was going to ask you, Tim, though. I was going to just ask, just to flip it back on you. Did you imagine that's what was going to happen
Never,
and
never,
unfold for
never.
you?
Yeah, no, never, never. And that's why I've never shared this part of the story of the basketball side of things, because what you're saying in regards to that identity, I am convinced that there's going to be at least a dozen, if not more, individuals listening. And whether that was, hey, they grew up being the quarterback or the cheerleader, or like you said, the basketball, they grew up believing that, hey, this was going to be my ticket. This was going to be my identity. This was going to be who I was becoming. And then, frankly, as we get older, whether you did that in college or didn't do it in college, all of a sudden you realize your body is not physically capable of doing what you were doing previously. And it strikes us. I know plenty of men, even as we get into our 40s, 45, 50, we can't do what we used to do. We can't move like we used to do. And now we're struggling with that identity. So it's a different time frame, but it's a very similar conversation about, this is who I was, and I can't do what I thought and who I was going to do. So let's start into where you're at and what you were doing. And what was that dream like? What was that vision like of how you were going to step in? And we usually say, how were you going to step into your business world, your entrepreneur world? But I do believe being a sports and an athlete, that's actually stepping into a career. And so what were your thoughts before you made the shift? Like, what were your dreams and aspirations? Like, where were you going there?
It's a great question, because I only knew basketball. And I say that in a way where as a young person, right, you're a teenager going through high school, then going into college, you're 18 years old, 19 years old, in our limited, our limited capacity and ways of thinking, right? For me as an athlete, and I think a lot of athletes can relate to this, is that you just know your sport. So for me, it was like, I'm playing basketball at the highest level. After that, I'm going to find a way where I can play this professionally, whether that's overseas or whether that's, back here in some ways. And I have teammates who have done that. Many of them have. A few of them are still in the WNBA. And sometimes I think about that, and not to compare, but it's in our human nature, right? You think like, that was me. That could have been me. What if that was me? What about my past? You start asking all of these questions, right? And so that was all that was top of mind for me in school. So I wasn't thinking about what I may do after sport, because after sport was never a question. That was never, a question, until it became the reality that I'm no longer playing this. And then what does that look like when you no longer have the sport. And that's the journey then that I went on. And it was also a huge part of the career that I stepped into, staying within sport, because it was learning how to have a relationship with sport being on the other side of it, right? What does it look like to not necessarily break up with it, but just have a different relationship? And that's what I had to learn how to do. And that was through coaching experience. That was through internships in athletic departments, and then starting my career post-college, working in the endurance running space, and also how I got into long distance running. And that, not to jump ahead, but it's that performance pressure that showed up in different forms. And I think that's a really important part, because when your identity is so much tied to what it is that you're doing and how you can achieve something and prove something, it's going to show up in different ways. And it's exactly what happened for me. I needed to find that thing that I could keep performing at, and that became long distance running. But also was the start of my career as well too. Working for the organization that, produces the marathon events and that.
So there's two things here, and I'm going to dive in and we're going to talk about this. We're going to get a little bit off track and then we'll come back to it, okay? Because this is where I think it's really, really important. You mentioned, and I'm going to tell you both of them so that way we can have direction, and then we'll jump back on one. So the first one is, you mentioned about this concept of thinking of what could have been, because you see others that are going down a path that you thought that you were going to go down. And you mentioned that it's not comparing, and I love that concept that it's not necessarily comparing. But I wonder if, we're going to just talk about this. We'll talk about the second thing. But I'm wondering if it's not more of a fear of missing out, a fear of what potentially could have been. Am I not valuable enough, or is there something wrong with me? Were any of those, I'll call them demons or thoughts or fears, did that enter your brain? And again, I understand you're not comparing yourself because other people have their own lives, but there's got to be something, and I know I've struggled with this. There's things that are just like, oh my goodness, if only I could have, if only it would have been. And it's that you're almost not willing to accept the reality of where you're at because you want to live in what that dream was.
Yeah.
Did you feel that?
Yeah, I totally did. I think it's a great point, Tim. And I think some of the biggest things for me that came up, it was that worth piece, right? About, being as good as what it is that you can achieve. And so again, not necessarily to compare, but knowing my value and how, from my perspective, how I thought others perceived me and how much weight I put on what I thought others thought of me in that way, and how much of that was tied to sport. And so if I wasn't doing that thing, then it meant X, Y, and Z. And so that's, I think, a lot of what our stories, right? We attach these meanings, we attach the meaning to them. And for me, with sport and with basketball, it was that meaning that I attached, that if I'm not good at this, if I don't achieve this level, then I'm not good enough here and in this relationship. And, I'm not seen as somebody that is worthy, which these are all things that I know are not true, but that's what was happening in my experience and how it is that I saw it. And it impacted all other areas of my life. So not just in sport, if you're good enough, but it impacted my decision-making, because I would think, if I do this one thing here, if I'm good enough, if someone approves this decision here, then I'll be good enough in their eyes. And if someone over here approves this, then I'll be good enough in their eyes. And so you lose sense of self because you are putting so much on the external validation and what somebody else is going to think or say, that you don't even realize who it is that you are in that, and your innate worth. So it's a big distortion, I think, and something that I definitely struggled with. And I would be lying if I said it doesn't show up in other ways in life, because we're human, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. And it's that is that core belief that we just accept about ourselves. When did you wake up and realize that you had that belief? You had that core of, if I don't perform, if I don't do, if I'm not this, then when did you wake up and realize, like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize and I didn't know? And sometimes we operate out of that ignorance. We operate out of just, as children, we accept a belief, whether, again, it's something that was said to us or something that was experienced or whatever. So when did you wake up and feel that?
I think the turning point for me in that was different circumstances that were truly out of my control. That I know I would always try to influence something. That if I see something, okay, I have the power to be able to, you know, make this look different. I have the power to do X, Y, and Z, or I have, we think that we can control everything and influence, a situation, a circumstance. And really, Tim, it got to a point for me where there were certain things in my life that were just happening, whether that was in sport, whether that was in personal, health, family, etc., that I got to a point that I really just broke down and was like, there's nothing that I can do to influence this situation. And I think when I got to that point, it shifted so much for me, and my faith plays a big role in that time as well too, because you just realize that, like, you don't have the, I mean, for lack of better words, right? Like, you don't have that kind of power to do all of these things in a way. Like, the power
Yeah.
lives within us, the endurance lives within us, and
Right.
that's a different kind of power, right? But I think the ways that we try to influence and control, sometimes we just can't do it. So what happens when you no longer have that ability to
Yeah.
influence something? Where are you? Who are you?
Yeah. And I struggled with it. I mean, our stories are, we're running parallel lines here. And I struggled with that. My challenge, I had to actually split the words influence and manipulation.
Mm.
Because when I control, or when I attempt to control, I'm manipulating actions and feelings, and I'm trying to manipulate people and positions. And that manipulation is obviously there so I can control and so I can work it out to either my benefit. The influence, and this is where I had to have my own split in my brain. The influence is when I'm trying to influence somebody to do better, to become better. And that for me was a critical aspect of this. I don't have control. I can influence to a certain level, but I can't. I need to stop that manipulation. I need to stop manipulating people into. So I totally get where you're coming from on that, and you're right. At some point in time, you just get to that level of I'm done. I can't do anymore. I'm completely done. You also mentioned, this is the second piece, um, that knowing versus feeling, right? So you knew mentally that you were losing yourself, right? But you still were trying to seek out that feeling of acceptance, or that seek out that feeling of approval. So can you talk a little bit about the battle that was internal there between, hey, I know I'm losing self. I know I'm losing who I am, but I can't help it because I need that feeling of fill in the blank, self-acceptance, value, whatever, worth, whatever you want to put in there. Can you talk about that internal struggle a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is just that. It's an internal struggle. It's the tension that we have, where there's a part of you that knows, or that can come back to, like, I'm still good innately. Again, if I believe in, again, going back to faith, right? Like, God in his creation created us good. Do I believe that I am good because he created me in that way? Yes. Like, yes. And then you're out into the world
Yep.
and you're doing these things, and it's that old story again, where I got to perform my way into something. I got to prove something here. I got to do this. I got to do that. And I want to bring this up because there's been so many different moments in my life. I'm sure you could speak to this too, and others who have been on your platform as well, just sharing their stories, right? It's hard to come back to that very, what is that one thing? It's such a great question, but when I think about my life and my journey, there's so many different moments and seasons of my life that have been so impactful for me, and that have, like, shifted the trajectory, in different ways. And when I think about, one for me was, really putting my faith in God in that. And that's, been a huge point in my life, and
Right.
it is
Right.
in everything that I'm doing, and just how it is I'm showing up in my core beliefs. But another part was that I mentioned that I got into long distance running after I stopped playing basketball, because that then became the performance outlet for me. And it was in
Oh, wait, I'm going to
20.
pause you
Yeah.
on that. How did you
Yeah.
discover that that was one of your core things? Because that, I think this is where we're going to go. And I love what you just said there. And I don't
Yeah.
want to totally take you off track, but at the same time, you realize performance pressure is something that you thrived on. How did you discover
Mm.
that for yourself?
Oh, I think it goes back to just that, that the need to achieve something,
Mm.
of like what it means to get a medal, what it means to cross a finish line, what it means to win a championship, and having those experiences throughout my athletic journey and career, knowing that once you hit that thing, because we've won championships in high school, and then, other parts, like when you have that, and you know what that feeling is, and again, attaching the meaning to it and the story to it, like, that if I do this thing, it means that I'm good. And so that's what I was going after, is just wanting that approval of, like, you know just being seen as somebody who is worthy, who is good. And so can I find these things that I can show up in that way, where I can say, honestly, look, this is what I'm doing. Look, like somebody applaud me, somebody see me. And there's
Celebrate.
a celebrate, right? And there's that thing underneath that, right, where it's like, what is it that's going on that you feel that lack, that people in your life don't care about you, they don't love you, they don't see you if you're not doing all these things. Because what I've learned after the fact is that, yeah, people do see you and they do care about you, and they are willing to sit with you, and they will look you in the eyes and listen to your story and listen to the things that you've been through and say, it makes sense. I see you. And that, for me, having somebody sit, I know we're going in different directions, but having somebody sit on the other side over a coffee with me to listen to my true experience, what I'm going through, it's a gift now. That's the kind of space I want to create for others, to share their voices, to share their stories, because I know what that did to me, to have somebody sitting on the other side say, I see you. I don't care about all these things that you can do and that you can achieve. I see you. And that is so powerful. And it is something that is just, again, at the core, right? And I think why I am so curious in terms of learning about other people and going to different countries and learning about cultures and language and how that influences and people's experiences, because it breaks down barriers and it makes sense as to why people go through the things, or why they feel the way that they feel, or why they think the way that they think. The experiences, they shape us.
They do.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
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 That was a little bit of a derail, but
We're going to continue on this derail because I think this is a very, very important thing. So I'm going to even take you a little bit deeper. I'm not sure where this is going to go, and I'm kind of hesitant slightly just because I know that this is personal both on my level and probably going to be a little personal on your level. But how do you divide? And I think a lot of people do struggle with this. And I'm going to kind of combine this. So just give me a minute to kind of explain, and then we'll go down the question. So the desire for us, and this comes even from our childhood, and then it steps into our business world. The desire is to have somebody celebrate with us. And we create, and whether that's in sports or band or the arts or wherever, our desire as a child is, hey, I'm doing this and I want you to celebrate with me. And unfortunately, a lot of our lives we're taught that do equals that celebration, right? So that means that success becomes our identity. So as we kind of follow down this path, the success defined, whether it's through you through sports in the Division 1 or whatever, some people it's through a business, some people it's through an artistic thing, it's a title, sometimes whatever you put in, whatever that blank is, and that doing becomes the identity because that's what we feel is being celebrated. You just said something very, very critical, which is somebody sitting across the table looking in your eyes saying, I'm celebrating because of who you are, not because of what you've done. So here's where we want to go and kind of try to explore this, is how do we separate out the success from our identity?
Gosh, such a question. Like, I think such an important question to explore, because again, not just in sport, but you just mentioned it there, in business, right? In life, in all of these different titles and labels. Would you believe it if I told you that over the last 10 years, I've had over 10 different employers, 10 different job titles and positions that I've held? One of them resulted in a Super Bowl ring with the Buccaneers, but that's just my fun fact. That's the truth. I've held so many different positions in jobs and transitions and everything. And in each and every one of them, the identity of who I am in some ways has shown up. I've worked through a lot. I've grown through a lot through that process. But the point is that it shows up, and it's a real question. Like it's a real, how do you make the distinction there? And I believe that it goes back, I think, to introspection that we do with ourselves and going a little bit beyond the surface, right? So what are those values behind why we do the things that we're doing? What does that say about who it is that we are? And lean into that, asking people around you in your close circle, your friends, your peers, your colleagues, about certain things, that they see in you. And then you start to realize, like, that's what makes me, right? Like, in who it is that I am. And those are the things that I can carry with me, that identity, regardless of what position I'm in, regardless of what title I hold. It's just a channel, and I think as a person of faith as well, too, that whatever position I'm learning this, it's a continual learning. It's not like, oh yeah, I got this. Like,
Yep.
this is my identity, because I wouldn't be being real and honest if I'm saying that I don't struggle with that stuff. I struggle with it now too. And that's why these conversations about it are so important, because we do struggle with it. But the more that we can see one another, the more questions we can ask, the more that we can seek to understand somebody, the more questions we ask ourselves, then we're just learning more about who it is that you are, that I am, that we are collectively. And I think that that's where we see that there's more that connects us than divides us. There's more that we have in common. It just looks different. But these are the things I believe let's lean into, because we're better together. And there's more to each and every one of us than this position that we can hold. But it's hard, because it's how I love the question you asked at the top of the conversation, right? Who are you? And how often do we start that by, this is what it is that I do? I mean, it's very common.
Yep.
And it's important, but it's just a channel. It's not at the core of who it is that we are.
Yep.
So I think going deeper, going a bit on, beyond the surface with one another. And there's ways that we can do that. You don't have to, get super vulnerable with every person that you see on the street, right? but again, I think it's just even the shifting and questions that we can ask can really bring that out in somebody. Like, well, what is it that you really care about? What lights you up? What do you like to do for fun? Yeah. These are some of the questions that then it signals to what our values are. And that tells a lot about who we are, I think.
Yeah. And that's so true. And we're talking about identity, and there's a song, it's called The Truth. And I think it's Megan Woods that puts that out there. And she goes through a list of, this is truly who I am. And if you haven't heard it, I highly recommend you take a listen to it, but it's a great, great song there. All right. I'm going to transition into this. What was the chaos? What was the trauma? I'll call it that, whatever, that caused you to switch out of, okay, I'm not going to be going and playing ball at a professional level. Where did that all happen? What was going on, in whether it was your own personal life or even circumstances and situations? What was going on that caused you, like, man, I've got to make this shift?
Yeah. I think when I look back on my journey in that way, and where I was and where I thought I was going to be at that time, I love basketball, still do, still love to play when I can. And so there's no doubt in that, for sure. But I also think that in part of, my whole story, it goes back to that, like, proving of needing to do this thing. And so I'm good enough if I do this. I don't know my life without it. How I know myself, how I know others has always been tied to my athletic ability. And so there was a bit of introspection at that time as well, too, where it was like, am I really in it? What am I really doing this for? And I think that question has showed up in my life in so many ways, because when you pause and you ask yourself that question, some things are going to come up that, again, you realize like, like, okay, this is why I'm really doing. Am I really doing it for this reason? What is the rest of my life going to look like? And I think, again, it was asking that question for me in that way, where there were some other things at the time that I was, thinking through, going through, etc. But from a basketball standpoint, that was really, that was it. That it was just like, I felt this. The moment, there's a quote that's like, when I stop having fun with it, I'm done with it, kind of thing.
Right.
And I was noticing that in myself, how it is that I was showing up to practice. And that's when you got to pay attention to the nudge inside you. That's like, what's going on here? And I think at that time I just had to pay attention to it. And I made the decision to make a change, and then it led down, another journey at the time. But this is another important point in this. And it goes back to, things only make sense in reverse sometimes, right? Where I had this dream to go play D1. I was going to, play at a high level, and then I was going to play overseas. And I don't know what I'm going to do about school and the rest of my life, but basketball was my thing. And I ended up meeting my husband at the school that I didn't think that I was going to go to. We end up going through, over 4.5 years of long distance prior to us getting engaged and then getting married, and like so on. And so I say all of that because, again, things sometimes only make sense in reverse. But I wouldn't change it. I mentioned earlier I had over 10 different employers in the last 10 years. I got stories for that I could happily share about the transitions, the learnings, the development in that. And so the message here in this, I think, and what I would want, others or those listening in to kind of take from this, from my perspective, is that there's so much more, right? There's so much more to your story. There's so much more of who it is that you are and how you're going to continue to evolve. And it's worth discovering. It's worth, just staying on the journey and keeping that open posture and learning, because there's endless possibilities. It's kind of really like what I like to keep reminding myself of is there's endless possibilities in the process. And you think you're going to go one way and it doesn't go that way. You go somewhere else. And it's because of those detours that's building the endurance within us to keep going. It sounds cliche, but it's real life. And I know it doesn't take away from the real raw emotion that people go through. I've been there too. I still go through the things. I still do it. I think we all can relate in some ways. It just looks different for each of us, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So much so.
Yeah.
And there's so many things. It's funny. You could talk. We're talking sports, so we talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth, and you got those
Yes.
kinds of quotes. I mean, like that. All of that stuff happens too, and I don't think there's anyone who has had their life perfectly laid out and planned, and has been able to follow that plan for decades. It doesn't always work the way that we thought it was going to work. There's so many twists and turns and circumstances and things totally beyond our control that we just don't have the ability to plan that stuff out. So that being said, you have entered, and I'm not even sure how long you've been on this journey, but you've entered a journey, a time where you have made the decision, I am going to be, first of all, accountable for my own personal growth. I'm going to learn who I am. I'm going to discover my values, and then I'm going to live by those. If you could just take a couple of minutes or some time and be able to say, okay, this is how I approach my own personal development. And I want you to approach it in a way, and I want you to talk about it in a way as in someone that really, like, if somebody's listening and they have this thought and this process, like, I need to go down this journey, but I don't know where to get started. I need to become more confident. I need to become more understanding of my value without doing, without success.
Mm.
Where would you start, or how would you explain your journey on that for your own personal development?
It started for me, honestly, having conversations with trusted people in my life and really cracking that door open and being vulnerable with people. Again, I mentioned before that it's been the people in my life. Like there's people, I go back, the people in my life, the people in my life,
Yeah.
but the space that others have created for me to be able to open up in a way. And it's not easy for everybody, Tim, to do that. It was hard for
Mm-mm.
me. I never wanted to seek help. I had the
I don't
stubbornness
think
of
it's
no.
easy for anybody. I mean, let's
Yeah,
just put it out
totally.
there. I don't think anybody finds this, oh, it's easy for me to open. No, I mean, there's so many secrets and hidden cavities and dungeons in our lives that we don't want people to know about. We tend to not, that's human nature. And that's the
Yes.
way we are.
And there's a real fear, I think, in a reality of like a vulnerability trap, right? I've
Mm-hmm.
walked into them before, and then afterwards you're like, ugh,
Yep.
like I just shared all of that with you, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so I think if you have people in your life that you're comfortable with going to, I think that's important. But the other part for me in my journey where I started was really just getting into this practice of journaling. And
Mm.
it's made a huge difference for me because what I do in that way is I start with, and this is something I learned with the coach I worked with the coach I worked with ultimately, but it's that practice, right, of like, what is that pressing thought, like how is it that I'm feeling? And when you start to just give yourself that permission to freely write, there's no edits, nobody's reading this, you can rip it up, you can throw it out. I've done that, but it's just the process of expressing that, because I think a lot of times for me, it wasn't until I was, 16, 17, 8, I don't know, like almost, yeah, even at that time, I wasn't even talking to people about the things I was really experiencing and feeling. And it may be, at any time in your life that, okay, it might be the first time you're actually expressing yourself in a vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
way, being vulnerable with somebody. But if you can do that with yourself first in a way and just, get that out there, I think that's a big first step in that way too. And just recognizing it's okay that you're feeling the way that you're feeling. That was a big thing for me. That was like, I'm bad for feeling this way. I'm bad for having like emotion. It's like, no, the things that you went through and that you walk through are real. And this is why also comparison doesn't work. And I think we fall into this trap of, I'm going to just put this into perspective. It could be much worse. This person over here is going through X, Y, and Z. I don't have it as bad as them, or I have it better than this person. Comparison doesn't work like that, because what's dark is dark. If you're going through something and it's dark and it hurts, then it's real. In the same ways that, like, if you have a win that you want to celebrate, it's worthy of celebrating.
Yep.
If it matters to you, it matters. And that's a big hurdle I had to get over as well too, because you fall into this like, oh, it's not, my story isn't worth anything, which that's not true. And again, why I love the space that you have with narrative here, because going back to the top of the conversation, each and every one of our stories matter.
Mm-hmm.
I hear a lot of times hosting my own podcast of people who I'm like, yeah, come on the podcast. Like, what do I have to share? Okay, well, you're
Yep.
exactly why you're coming on,
Mm-hmm.
because you do have something to share. It does matter. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And so, yeah, again, I think it doesn't have to be all of a sudden you jump right in and just share your whole life story to the next person. But I do think if you have a couple like trusted people to have these conversations with, it's a great place to start. And also with yourself in journaling and writing. And the confidence thing, I think what I've learned, again, I can't take credit because I've worked with people who've helped me and come
Mm-hmm.
alongside me, and it's made all the difference in my journey, my life. But what I've learned so much and through my own experience is that by you just taking that step out and the step of courage, the confidence comes by taking the step. It's
Absolutely.
not that, we
Yep.
try to muster up all of the confidence and say, once I'm confident enough, then I'll do the thing. But when you step into the thing, you build the confidence. And that's what I would say is like reframing that, right? And it takes the courage to just jump out and do it, but
Yeah.
you'll build the confidence along the way.
Then the courage is just the action in the face of fear. It's not
Yeah,
allowing the fear to stop you. That's simply what courage is. You just
so
now
good.
are taking that step. Even though you're scared to death, you're taking that action. You're taking that step. And I love what you said about the putting things in perspective. And again, it's not necessarily the comparison, because you can always find somebody that may be a worse off or whatever. The key here, and I think this is really important because I've seen this happen, people will look for others that have it worse to be
Mm,
able to compare in a manner that then, well, my story's not valuable. My
mm.
pain's not valuable. My pain's not as bad. So therefore, I'm going to keep it to myself. And that, I believe, is such a false narrative that we struggle against and we fight against, is because, like you so eloquently said, every story does matter. Everybody's life matters. Everybody, and it's not. We're not attempting to devalue. We're reframing that everybody's a little bit different, and everybody does have those feelings, and all of those feelings are valid. So I'm going to ask you this other question. I have talked to I don't know how many people, lots of people, and I've done speaking, and I've talked about journaling. Inevitably, the vast majority of people, and I dare say it's probably 95 to 99% of the people, as soon as you bring up journaling, they're like, ugh, like, why? I hate writing. I hate. So I am curious, like, how do you express to somebody how valuable it is to journal? And I have ideas and thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts on it, because I can't tell you how many times people have sat there and told me, I can never write. I can never journal. This seems like such a process, and it's this and that. So what would you say to something like that? How do you get started with it? What would you get to really feel that value?
I think this may sound silly because it's journaling, right? But as somebody who has always had a performance mindset, it's stripping that off the table, right? There's
Mm,
no outcome here. There's no goal. And I think a lot of us, we want to do things with intention, with an end goal. You don't have to, it doesn't mean that there's no intention with the journaling, right? But can you allow yourself to enter a process where it doesn't matter where it's going to go? It doesn't matter what's coming up. It's just you're literally giving yourself that space and that
hmm
freedom without any kind of limitations, no edits. It doesn't matter. I mean, I think the value in that for me that I've discovered is going back, is the journals I've had from 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. I have them, I keep them, and I go back on. It's a regular practice of mine to go back and to see, not to relive the things of the past, but it's looking at where you've been, how you've endured, and how you can keep going through this. And that gives me hope and
hmm
encouragement and inspiration when I need it. And I think that's the biggest value there, is that you see sometimes we get in our heads and we think, oh, this is, how am I going to get out of this? Or like, what's going on? Or where do I start? Or all of these things. And I think you go back and you're like, look, and you can start this practice now, And it doesn't mean that it has to look a certain way. If you can give yourself 5 minutes a day
I love
to
that.
just
Yep.
to just say, hey, whatever's coming up right now, I'm going to do this. And
Yep.
that's helped me in a lot of ways too, Tim, with when there's external, like when there's circumstances happening that are out of my control that are impacting me, because we know that that can show up in our work and how it is that we are in our relationships and with people when we have things going on in the background. What I've learned, again, with the help of somebody coming alongside me in that way, is can I just give myself that 5 minutes, that 10 minutes to pay attention to those thoughts, to that emotion, to give it the space that it needs, because that's important. But
hmm
also realize that I'm in this present moment right now. I have work that's in front of me. I have people that's in front of me. I have my life here, and I can keep moving forward. And also I can honor and I can look at, you know, what it is that's going on and realize it's important too, but I'm not going to allow that to consume me. So
Yeah.
that's where I find like that 5 to 10 minutes of dedicated time to give it attention has been extremely helpful for me. And I think it can be applied, in everyday life.
And what you're saying, there's a lot of historical value to it. We can go back. I think it's almost 6,000 years ago, we can read about kings and about what all they did, and that's their journaling. And they go back and they would read it when they couldn't sleep, or when they would go back and read it. I find myself doing the exact same thing. The second piece that I feel like is so deep is, if you're willing, this is my hope or prayer, is that my kids someday will actually realize who I am. And they'll be able to go through and read that. All of the troubles and all of the challenges and all of the struggles, they'll be able to read that and say, oh, now I understand why dad did what he did. And I didn't know that was going on behind, and like all of that stuff. I would hope that at some point in time they can see that and learn from it.
So
there's so much more stuff here I'm sure we could talk about, but we are coming to the time. We're going to have to close this down. What would be one thing that you would want to share with those that are listening? Something that you like, man, if you didn't hear anything else that was going on, all of the other stuff that we're talking. Actually, let me back up. I'm going to do this. If you're listening and you have struggles or challenges about journaling, you need to contact either myself or Ashley, and we'll walk through a couple of different ideas that you can do, because I can't even tell you how critical journaling has been for my own personal development. It's been such a big deal. I'm looking at my shelf right now. I think I've got 5 books completely full right now, 6 or 7. I don't know. I've got a bunch of them. But the key is this: it's like, it just helps so much with our personal development that it is one of the most valuable practices that I can suggest. So if you are having any kind of questions whatsoever, either contact me or contact Ashley. Okay, so that it's not even a commercial. Just do it. Okay,
do it. I love it.
Just do it. Right. All right. So let's go back to this part of it now. Ashley, what would be the one thing that you would want to share, or if they didn't take away anything else, this is the one thing that you would want to share with those that are listening?
Yeah, it's a great question. I appreciate you asking that question. I'd look back on my journey, and I've been through a lot of transitions, a lot of challenges, a lot of struggles, a lot of turning points, a lot of X, Y, and Z. And what I want to say is that there's no wasted space. And I think that's something that I would want to encourage others with, because I do know that sometimes when we're going through seasons, we're walking through seasons, and we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we think, this is like, I feel hopeless. I felt hopeless before. I've felt these things before. And what I want to say in that is that there's more to you. There's more to your story. There's more to the thing that you only see what's right in front of you, but there's so much more out there. And really, I think if you can allow yourself to connect to hope, just to connect to a bit of hope in the possibility that it can look different, it will be different, things will change, it too shall pass. That goes both good and bad things that we walk through, right? Like, and I think that's so important, because things are fleeting. And so the hard times, the hard things we're going through, it will pass. Also the good times, it will pass. It keeps us present and keeps us in, a posture of gratitude. But I think that's just it. Can we connect to the hope? And it's possible. And I think that if anything, it would just be coming into that belief that there's no wasted space, that there is hope. And I also know from my experience, again, because this is something I think is so important. It's easy for people to say, oh yeah, no, things will get better. This kind of like toxic positivity, right? I know that there's real emotion. There's real pain. There's real struggle. There's real thoughts that are like, I've probably had a lot of the same thought. Like, I have. And so I want to recognize that, because I think that's very important, to not just, make a blanket statement and say things will get better, things will be good. But I think, can you connect to the possibilities? And I want to encourage people to connect to the possibilities and imagine, what if has a negative connotation, right? I think it's always that worst case scenario, right? This is another great journaling practice. What if? Flip the script, start thinking about these possibilities. I think by doing that, you put yourself into this space where you just wonder and imagine. And there's something very powerful in that. So that's my encouragement, Tim.
I love it. As when you're talking, all right, so this is how strange my brain is. All I can see is Nemo's dad and Dora hanging onto the tongue And he goes, "You think you know these things, Nemo, but you don't." And he's like, "Okay, well, I'm going to just let go." And he's like, "Well, what if we get swallowed by the whale? What if we?" And then all of a sudden, then they're out by the spout and everything else. And I'm just like, man, that's exactly what you mean is the what if. We often sit there and we think the what if is we're going to get eaten by the whale. And the reality is the whale is telling us to let go. So we can come out the spout and be ready to be where we're at. It's just
For sure.
that opposite perspective. That's just so cool. All right. How can people get in contact with you? What's the best way to be able to be in touch?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say through Endurance Diaries. It's the space, the platform that I have. So you can go to endurancediaries.com. Also, I'm active on LinkedIn, ashley.ljesevic, which that might need to be spelled out in the show notes.
Well, actually, so what we'll do, and we can spell it out, but I'm going to tell everybody, you better just go to the notes and then click on the
Yeah.
links there, because that's going to be the best way to get there. So
Exactly. But yeah, that'd probably be the best way to get in contact there. And again, I just want to say thank you, Tim, for inviting me on and sharing this space with you and having this conversation. It really, it means a lot to connect in this way and to have, the time to share and have this kind of conversation. So thank you for allowing me to be part of it and for all that you're doing here.
We're honored to have you. I mean, I love these conversations. I love being able to talk a little bit deeper than just that kind of surface level, and then really explore some of these feelings and the challenges that we faced. Again, we're doing this because we know that there's other people that are facing or in the exact circumstances that we've gone through or that we're going through.
Totally.
So thanks again. For those that are listening, man, I'll tell you what, these kinds of stories are really key in our development. And as Ashley said earlier, too, each one of these stories, including your own story, is valuable. You matter. Even if it's the smallest, you think it's the smallest type story and you don't have anything highlighted, your story is a big deal. It really, truly is. And so until next time, what I want you to do is keep writing, crafting, if you can, journal, but keep writing and crafting your story because it does matter. You matter, you're important, and you have value.